It is Saturday, November 23rd, and welcome to the broadcast. And let me just say, wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and find something to be thankful for and help those who have less to be thankful. And welcome to this special edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. Crystal Berger is the founder of EBO, a journalist turned innovator. She joins us live in the studio. And Radley Devlin is a political editor at Daily Signal. He joins us by Zoom. You know, as I think back and look at President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet selections, and you can go back as far as Bush, Reagan, even Trump 2016, and I'm only speaking of Republicans. You know, diversity has taken on different meanings and what that actually means, but it's one thing to talk about diversity, even in the mentioning of people who are possibilities for his cabinet. Do you think the president has a diversity problem? Does it bother you, Bradley, what you've seen thus far?
Well, again, it depends what you mean by diversity.
Let's add finding some color. Let's start there.
So diversity in terms of...
Let me help you there a little. I mean, you had an overwhelming number of men who happen to be black to vote for him in extraordinary in numbers, unprecedented. But I want you to speak about the diversity. Let me see where your heart and your political instincts are.
Yeah, I think my political instincts are this cabinet, as compared to the previous Trump cabinets, is much more reflective of the coalition that Trump built. But let's remember, Trump didn't build this coalition.
Wait a minute. Let me stop you, because you're getting on your intellectual talking points here. Are we not trying to heal the nation so everybody feel that we're coming together to show that Trump can rise above everything else and bring everybody together? Because one thing the election has shown us, that many of normal groups that usually support the Democratic Party abandoned the Democratic Party, whether it was the economy, whether it was family values, whether it was the border crisis. Shouldn't the president's optics show that we're healing the nation and everyone is represented in these cabinet choices that he's making?
Yeah, and I think you're going to have a lot more come out, too. But let's remember, the coalition was built on the bread and butter issues, right? It wasn't built on the basis of race or the basis of creed.
I said nothing about race. I may have mentioned, but I'm talking about diversity. I mean, you want a cabinet. I think you want a cabinet, because I hear this all the time, and I don't mean to interrupt you, that looks like America.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the additions of people like Tulsi Gabbard, with the additions of people like RFK Jr., you have a diversity of thought that can be used by the president to effectuate the mandate that he's been given by the American people. And let's remember, there's a balance between having a diverse cabinet and actually having a cabinet loyal to the president and ultimately the American people, right? Because the American people don't elect RFK or they don't elect Tulsi Gabbard. They elect the President of the United States. And the responsibility of these executives and these cabinet secretaries is to effectuate the will of the American people through the president's agenda. So there should be diversity of thought and entrepreneurship with how we should tackle America's problems. But at the end of the day, what ultimately hurt Trump last time was like too much diversity.
Well, let me stop you. There are a lot of thinking Americans who voted for Donald Trump. If you talk about diversity of thought, is that diversity represented, Crystal?
In my opinion, diversity is what you see on the front end and on the back end. And I've heard a couple of things here around the diversity of thought, and that is representative of every single ethnicity that exists in America. And that should be reflective, because we know just on its face, right? Teams that have leadership that are diverse, they have a 35% more likelihood of success than teams that don't. And that's just on the face of leadership. And so when you think about the bread and butter, meaning that those actual institutions drive more revenue, they have more work-life balance, they have more workplace camaraderie. And so when you think about the nation being a business essentially in itself, if we don't have that leadership reflective of the actual fabric of America, and you can see that outside of what people think, because we don't know what's inside of people's brains, right? But you need to see that representation on the front end is critical to drive those core results that we want to actually get in America, like improving the economy.
Let me go back to Devlin. Why is Pete Hegseth's selection is all of a sudden in trouble?
I think it's the corporate media might be playing up how in trouble Pete Hegseth's nomination is. I will say that Pete Hegseth has...
Let me stop you again. Donald Trump has said on the record himself, and his surrogates have said on the record themselves, that they were misled and not given all the facts when they interviewed him. So this is not the corporate media. This is coming from within the Trump camp.
That the nomination is endangered because they weren't given all of the information. I think that might be overstating the case a little bit too much.
Well,
you
may be overstating the case a little too much. I'm just stating facts. You
well,
may be understating the case. It's just a fact. His nomination is in trouble, and I asked you why.
If the nomination is in trouble, here's what would be the case. The establishment part of the Republican Party, the NatSec part of the Republican Senate, is not on the same page as the president-elect when it comes to issues of foreign affairs. Namely, they want to continue to aid Ukraine, and they also want to continue to aid the Israelis. Now, the president sees that issue a little bit more similarly than most establishment Republicans in the Senate. But when it comes to the Ukraine issue, and if Pete Hegseth is going to change department policy to more reflect the president's agenda on Ukraine, then you could see the McConnell wing of the Republican Party want to rebuff Trump's nomination of Pete Hegseth in order to continue to fund that war in Ukraine. So that's actually the political issue. They dress it up with various, ethics complaints, this, that, and the other thing. But at the end of the day, it's the political results that matter most to the senators and to the electeds, because those are the things that you have to take home to the voter when you're trying to get reelected.
Well, Peter Hegseth is in trouble because it was not disclosed of the payoff to someone who he was accused of being sexually harassed, because in his own words, he decided to pay it off because he thought it would have affected him getting the role that Fox News was offering him at the time. Just for the record, let me be clear on why his nomination is in danger. But I want to come back to you, Crystal, and I'm trying to understand what President Joe Biden and his vice president are doing in Ukraine. Why give Ukraine these long-range missiles when it's something you did not do before? Russia just on Wednesday night, fired massive barrages of ballistic missiles on Ukraine, and in their own words, to send a message to Washington, London, and Paris. Why? Especially when President Trump is speaking to Putin, he's speaking to Zelensky, trying to bring resolution in so innocent people don't continue to die. Are they trying to sabotage the president-elect?
Well, I can't speak to that, Armstrong, if they're looking to sabotage. And also, I'm very, very bipartisan in this issue in the middle of the line. I believe that what the administration, either the one that is outgoing or the one that is incoming, needs to focus on is saving lives at the end of the day, right? And making the most strategic decisions to be able to make people get their families back, to preserve the integrity of the country and our economy. And so for me, and I can only speak for me, I believe that the administration may be attempting to finish an effort that they were pursuing in a way that they believe will help the next administration come in and navigate through what happens in a war zone. For me, I do believe that the best thing would do is to be able to figure out how to get our troops back home safely and actually to give the people peace there.
So Devlin, how is this helping Trump and the people in Ukraine, and why would Zelensky even embrace this and escalate this conflict?
Yeah, I think the number one backdrop to this is an appropriations fight, right? Where the government's going to run out of spending come December 20th. And with Biden introducing long-range capabilities given to the United States, to Ukraine, to strike inside of Russia, Biden is trying to generate momentum for the Ukrainian side so that senators on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, decide that they want to spend more money on the Ukraine war and have that spending persist through the end of the fiscal year so that Trump doesn't leave his imprint on the federal budget and appropriations until September, October, far beyond his first 100 days in office. And so what does that do in the meantime? It handcuffs your diplomatic options. What you saw Zelensky say after the election of President Donald Trump was that he was willing to consider and sit down at the negotiating table and secure a just peace. You weren't hearing that from Zelensky when the Biden administration was in power, and you're hearing it now because he sees the writing on the wall. But this seems like a last play for the Democratic Party currently in power to make sure that their priorities continue, at least for some period of time, into the Republican administration.
You know, I have to tell you, Crystal, I was absolutely shocked when I learned on Thursday that the Illinois Supreme Court overturned Justice Smollett's verdict. I mean, I literally followed that trial and I was convinced that it was a hoax. But the Illinois Supreme Court overturned it. What are we missing?
Armstrong, I don't want to be put on the spot there. And
nobody's put on the spot. Yeah, I think I'm dealing with everybody the same on the set today. I put Devlin on the spot.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes.
You have, and again, I have to say that in doing this particular segment, I don't address politics of that nature, Armstrong. I am a tech founder who is committed to seeing how innovation impacts society, and I don't want to take your show off of your, off of your program.
In other words, you don't want to offend anybody today. You want to play it safe.
Well, I mean, and honestly, that's where I believe that the conversation is about. How do we move our country forward in a way that we can have results that everybody who struggles in America can see what they want, right? Whether you're on the far left or the far right. I'm a girl who grew up in West Baltimore. I'm committed to things that are going to impact the people on the ground, and I've been able to go to the highest heights in corporate America. And what I know is that this country, if we continue to focus on issues that keep us separate, that it keeps us from actually getting to the thing that we need to actually address, and that is really leveling the playing field. Like, I love to talk about the economics of issues and how we can actually get our country equalized, and that's just my preference. And so I would say, if that's called playing it safe, then absolutely that's who I am, and that's where I'll always stand.
Well, look, I respect that, and I think there's absolute truth to what you're saying, but I cannot ignore what the Illinois Supreme Court, Zelensky, Trump's, I can't ignore that. I still have to talk about it. Sure. You've got the last word, Devlin, before I say goodbye to both of you. I like segments like this when I can make people uncomfortable, especially journalists. Devlin?
Yeah, at some point you're going to have to come on my show so I can make you uncomfortable, Armstrong. Listen, I think it's when we enter this lame duck period of politics, a lot of things happen, like the Jussie Smollett overturned conviction, underneath the rug. And actually, I think the responsibility of journalists and of concerned citizens is to bring those issues back to the fore so that the American people can actually learn, our American leaders can actually learn from and have accountability to what they promised to do in the first place. If we can't restore accountability, then I think all the things that we talk about, the lofty ideas, making those lofty ideas actually materialize in the United States, it'll all be for naught.
Listen, I love the unity message from Crystal, and I appreciate having you on. And we'll have you back so we can talk more in your home court.
Absolutely.
A deal?
That's a deal. I would love that.
That's a deal. And when we come back, Make America Export Again. That's our topic when we return on this edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. Don't go away. Alan Beard is Managing Director of Interlink Capital Strategies, and Troy Fuhriman, former senior official at EXIM Bank and the first Trump administration, joins us. Gentlemen, we welcome you both to the broadcast. What is the Make America Export Again initiative, and why is it so important? Alan, we'll start with you.
So I think everybody knows that the U.S. has run huge trade deficits for decades, and this has only gotten worse over the last few years with COVID and the high inflation and the fact that the U.S. has emerged from COVID perhaps faster than some of our trading peers. And the reality is that deficits are part of a natural ebb and flow of trading between countries. But in the US, it's gotten so acute that in some industries, in fact, on a broad basis, the US has an export profile that's more akin to a developing country. We sell primary products, large commodities like wheat, oil and gas, chemicals, but then they're sent to Asia or to Europe where they're transformed into value-added products, and they turn around and sell them back to us. And that's part of what's driving the trade deficit. And it's gotten so bad, as we know in COVID, that the pharmaceutical industry is solely dependent on chemicals, primary chemicals that are manufactured in China. They're then transformed into finished product in India, and then they're shipped to the US for packaging and sales into the market. And that's now happening in the food industry as well, to the point that last year the US became a net importer of food. So all of these things are creating a concern about our independence. When we talk about security and our ability to project power, if the basic building blocks of our economy are essentially outsourced to China, India, and Europe, which in many respects they are, how independent can we truly be? I heard an upsetting comment that most of the primers for bullets, for instance, are manufactured in Russia. In many respects, they're our arch rival, and yet the munitions actually require Russian inputs in order for us to prosecute a war. So all of these things are becoming critical for the U.S. to become more independent, and I think the Trump administration recognizes that. They, I think, have had a huge impact on changing the paradigm, where the U.S. and all of the policymakers believe that free trade was the only way to look at things. And I think Trump, rightly so, looked at this and said, free trade is one thing, but we don't have that in the world. We need to have more of a reciprocal trading arrangement. Troy sits in South Korea, and most of the Asian economies are still very mercantilistic.
Well, let me get Troy. Let me get Troy in this conversation. Troy, you think about the competitiveness in the U.S. global trade market compared to a decade ago, and then you also hear President-elect Donald Trump talking about these tariffs, which is certainly going to have an impact. Could you speak to that, please? And welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Pleased to be here. The tariffs, I believe, have a very important function if you're thinking about the overall strategy of the United States in countering the mercantilist policies, for example, of China, or looking at even South Korea and other countries that have the government operating essentially as a wing of their major corporations. And they engage in many policies, whether it's friends like South Korea or even more adversarial parties like China. They engage in non-tariff trade barriers all the time. One of the things that I encountered when I was in the Trump administration is that we had to deal with China literally cutting off the purchases of American medical equipment because they were using their internal budget laws to stop the purchases of American equipment. And when they engage in these types of non-tariff trade barriers, they're essentially blowing up the fiction of free trade around the world. And so to the extent that these countries are engaged in activities that go against really the trade of, or the spirit of the World Trade Organization and the concept of free trade, we have the right to counter that. The second thing to think about is the importance of national security. We know that economic security is the foundation of national security. And to the extent that we have certain industries or certain components that go into critical aspects of national security industries that come from adversaries or even from too far away to make us feel secure, we need to look at using tariffs or other potential tools to help secure our security.
You know, Alan, what role will public-private partnerships play in driving this export growth?
So I think Troy has kind of articulated how our competitors work. They are much more closely aligned with their governments, and I'm not suggesting that the U.S. reorder our economic structures along Asian lines or even European lines. I mean, the U.S. has always had a much more laissez-faire attitude to having the government involved in business. But the reality is that, as Troy says, when Boeing is competing against Airbus, they're competing just as much with the French and the Germans as they are with a company. And they have to do whatever it takes to win the business. And a lot of U.S. companies like to think that they don't need the government to help them. But when you're competing against not just a corporation like Samsung, but you're competing with South Korea, then there needs to be a level playing field where the U.S. government shows up and in some fashion provides a similar kind of support. It's never going to be the same as the Asian countries where, you know, a JBIC or a Korean EXIM bank work so closely with their companies that there's not a whole lot of difference versus the U.S. where EXIM Bank is kind of brought in at the last minute and not as embedded, if you will, in the transaction.
But you know what?
We could do a lot better job.
There's a high cost in exporting, which is a fact. And then you've got an extended life cycle of these products. How does that play into it?
You want to take that, Troy? Or
Troy?
When you're talking about the high cost of the lifestyle, which products are we talking about here?
Any of the products.
Okay. So when you're talking about how we compete on long life cycle products, one of the things that's important to recognize is that the United States government has, as Alan rightly points out, taken a very laissez-faire attitude in the way that we deal with and even support our businesses. The Europeans, the Asians, they take a very much more hands-on approach where they are looking at the long-term game. And the Americans just don't look that long down the road. And we're willing to give up industries or parts of industries in the name of free markets, whereas they're looking down the road and thinking, we want to maintain these jobs in our country, so we're actually going to go hand in hand with our businesses and go around the world as a government with business to help open up the doors and keep the doors open. The U.S. government doesn't do that.
But don't you think the United States has more of a cultural and language barrier than, let's say, these countries that you're speaking of, that plays into this in an overwhelming way?
Well, I think overall, the United States does have a significantly different culture in many ways. We have multiple cultures in our country,
yes,
which do give us some advantages as we go around the world, that we have natural ties into other countries because of our different immigrant groups and so forth. But it's also important to recognize that we have a different economic culture. And I'm not talking about doing away with that. We believe much more in free markets, but we have to recognize that in the United States itself, we can maintain a free market. But outside of the United States, it's anything but a free market. And so the government, I believe, can take actions that don't go against our free market principles generally, but will help our businesses so that they can get in the door and stay in the door when they're competing for business, particularly in countries like China, where it is the government itself that is contracting, and they typically want to see the government next to the business, or they won't even talk to them.
So, Alan, where do you see the most prominent opportunities in U.S. exports?
So I think Troy kind of touched on this. We are a unique society in that we have large populations from other countries. The diaspora of, for instance, Nigeria is so big that in Houston, they call Houston the second largest Nigerian city in the world. And once you get below the top sort of 100 exporters in the United States, where there's a real opportunity is many of the diaspora, the people that are now US citizens, but they were born in another country. They're the ones that understand the country that they came from, and they have the ability to go in and make inroads. And so indeed, in our practice, we see a number of Nigerian-born American citizens who want to go back and provide goods and services from the U.S. We have one right now where it's a Nigerian American who wants to sell medical equipment to Nigeria. And in this case, we're using EXIM Bank, and she has gone to Nigeria. She's made a market for this service, and now she's importing U.S. medical equipment because that's perceived as being the best equipment for this service. That's where I think there's a real opportunity. I mean, we have a large East Indian population. We have you can go almost around the world, and we have large populations, and most of these people want to do business in their home countries. Indeed, if you look at the remittances.
Hold that before we get to the remittance. Alan and Troy, we'll be back. Make America export again.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Make America export again. Alan Berger, please continue. You were getting into the remittance.
So the remittances from the U.S. to overseas countries is a huge portion of aid. It's actually larger than most aid programs from the developing world. Just in the U.S. alone, there's over $100 billion of remittances that go out to Latin America, India, Africa, you name it. Just imagine if some of those remittances could be harnessed into economic activity. That's sort of the old adage that if you teach somebody how to fish, they're going to be more independent than if you just give them the fish itself. If some of those remittances could be turned into actually economic activity where we're shipping goods and services from the U.S. to help develop some of these countries, that's a huge market. And again, it comes back to what I was saying earlier, that this diaspora that we have in the United States could actually be turned into a huge benefit to help America export again.
So let me come back to Troy Fuhriman. And everyone knows that the biggest export is oil. But one of the things that we don't get into enough are these passenger vehicles, these civilian aircraft parts. Talk about those specifically, Troy. It's huge.
Yeah, it is huge. If you look at the overall supply chains, and for example, an aircraft, just take a Boeing aircraft, for example, you're having a supply chain that extends across virtually every state in the union, and it also extends internationally. And there are so many large and small businesses that have wonderful jobs that are attached to these. And that's the thing we have to remember whenever we're talking about any of these types of export-related policies. They ultimately need to support the companies that ultimately support Americans working and providing for their families. So it's not just huge in the sense of big dollars, but it's huge in the sense of millions and millions of jobs across our country.
True. So Alan, what advice do you have for small and medium-sized businesses looking to expand internationally? And what industries hold the most potential for boosting U.S. exports in the near future?
So one is, I think, just the recognition that 95% of the consumers of the world are outside of the U.S. So you've got a huge market that's outside of the United States. And now, in terms of GDP, the developing world is a larger percentage of the world's GDP than the developed world. And in those developing markets, again, this idea that you have people that were born there, that live in the United States, they can identify opportunities in areas that the U.S. excels in. While it's unfortunate that a lot of our highly engineered products are increasingly going offshore to manufacture their parts. Indeed, Boeing, you take a 787 and a huge amount of the 787 is the supply chain is overseas. The wings come from, Japan. And that's, you may recall more recently, John Deere wanted to move their production from the United States to Mexico. And Donald Trump said, if you do that, then there will be repercussions. But having said that, there is still a premium, and most people are willing to pay that premium for U.S. made products. Mack Trucks for years has been the industry standard in third world countries for a solid truck that, does the job versus a Chinese truck that may be half the price, but only lasts, half the time. And so to the extent that we can convince U.S. Business people that the market overseas is something that can be penetrated, that it's worth the effort. And to your point earlier, Armstrong, it is more complicated. The distances are larger. There's language issues sometimes. The state, the tariffs and the state support overseas is different. But again, that's where the market is. 95% of the consumers are overseas, and increasingly the GDP is overseas. And if you want to build a business that can grow beyond just the U.S., you got to look at those markets.
Troy, the United States is the cornerstone for the global economy. We trade with over 200 countries worldwide. In 2023 alone, we had $5.1 trillion in trade around the world. I don't think people understand the significance of the United States as the cornerstone, the anchor to global trade around the world.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely correct. The United States is the anchor of global trade, goods, services, and also things that we don't think about that often, for example, like financial services, financial products. All these things make a huge difference, not just for the United States, but the entire world economy. And there's no reason at all why we should be underestimating the impact of the United States and the power of the United States to leverage that for the good of the American worker.
So what do you think has changed to slow our capacity when you coined this playoff Trump's "Make America Great Again"? Make America export again. Why do we have to make it export again? Why has it changed? What has disrupted this around the world? I'm going to stay with you, Troy.
Well, I think there are a few things we can look at. One, it's just the exchange rate. The dollar's become incredibly strong. And I think we need to look very carefully at policies that have led to that. One of the absurdities, or I guess one of the oddities of the United States is, given the fact that we have the reserve currency of the world, it makes it so that even when the United States screws up economically, the world still runs to the dollar. And because of the unique positioning of the dollar, it makes it so I think we have to look more carefully at how we actually manage our currency. We need to look at things like our federal deficits. And we also need to recognize that there are countries around the world, for example, South Korea, where I'm sitting right now, China, over the past decade or so, even countries that don't get talked about a lot, like Peru, have engaged in massive currency manipulation. And we need to recognize that and have adequate discussions and take appropriate countermeasures where necessary.
Troy, what are the biggest challenges, and particularly when you think about the global conflict, unlike anything we've seen in quite some time, these continuous disruptions, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in Iran, whether it's in the Middle East with Israel, whether it's the escalation of what's going on in Ukraine, what we don't talk about in the motherland of Africa, when you look at the conflict that goes on in Ethiopia and these religious wars, how does that impact us here at home?
Well, for one thing, it creates more uncertainty. And even just going back to the currency alone, it makes it so people flee to the dollar. And so it has the perverse effect of actually making it more expensive for us, or more difficult for us to export to the world. And so strangely enough, these conflicts do lead to increased trade deficits for the United States. And so one of the things that we can do if we want to make America export again is actually make the world more peaceful again. And so this is one reason why I support broader aspects of President Trump's at least aspirational foreign policy to bring more stability and peace to the world.
You know, Alan, we can learn so many lessons from countries who have strong export models like Germany and China, and also learning to better make those relationships work for us as well. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you take Germany, for instance, they have a pretty strong policy to keeping their value-added manufacturing in Germany. In the U.S., again, because of our culture and the way we're set up economically, we have spent the last 4 decades chasing the cheapest places to produce products. And so these supply chains that we talk about are spread out all over the world. And that worked great when the U.S. was kind of projecting its military strength and kind of policing the waters. But I think one of the things that Trump has touched into is how much can the U.S. afford to project this kind of power? And if indeed he comes to the conclusion that we can't be policing every place in the world, then these supply chains are going to become, very, very risky. And that's part of the reason for this movement for onshoring and nearshoring, Because if you've got to get your product from Vietnam, or you've got to get it from Malaysia or someplace like that, and there's conflict between Taiwan and China, you're not going to have access to your supply chain. And so there has been a huge rush to more so nearshoring than onshoring, but moving production back to Mexico, moving it in some cases to the U.S., and that ultimately strengthens our independence and our ability to project power.
Look, Alan Baird, it's been a pleasure to have this insightful and educational conversation with you and Troy about the importance of making America export again, and how America is the dominant player and the cornerstone of the market. I look forward to having follow-up discussions, because we definitely need to increase our imports in a very cautionary way, I must say. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, when we return, what comes to mind when you think about hassle-free home services, things that goes on inside the home that you just don't want to be bothered with anymore? My man, Erik Kimel, is in the studio to talk about his new business model, hassle-free homes. You don't want to miss that segment. Thank you guys for joining us. I'm Armstrong Williams. Don't go away. We'll be back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Welcome back to the broadcast. Erik's my guy. We hang out. I really respect him because you've been an entrepreneur from a very young age, starting at a tutoring company in high school and then at Harris, the shaving brand. How did you, even before you moved to home services, talk about your entrepreneurial journey and how much your upbringing and your parenting impacted that?
Well, thanks so much for having me. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. When I was a little kid at the dinner table, my parents had started a real estate company. They sort of instilled in my mind that, you gotta work for yourself. You have to start a business. So when I was 16 years old, I was in really advanced math and science classes in my high school. I wasn't as good at English and reading, and I went to a big public high school, and I just wanted to connect those two groups of students. I had the idea for the tutoring business. I placed an ad in a local paper. I was a tutor. Then all my friends in my math class were tutors. I wrote about it on my college essay to college, and I built my tutoring business from a very young age. Everything I learned in my university years, I applied directly into the business. That business was big enough to support me when I graduated from college in 2008. So unlike my classmates going into finance in the, in the eye of the storm of the financial crisis, I carved my own path, and ever since then, I've just always really tried to focus on entrepreneurial businesses.
Now, I tell you what's fascinating. I have been trying to get Erik to come on the show, right? Oh, would not have it. But all of a sudden, he reaches out and said, I don't mind coming on to talk about this home services business. I said, what? You're going to come on? Because this guy is so shy and so low-key. And I think it's important for guys like you who've been so successful at a young age with entrepreneurship to share these stories to inspire others. But talk about this hassle-free, because that's what you're doing, home services that you've created with your family.
Of course. So, we moved back from New York City. We lived in an apartment to the DC area, kind of American dream style, bought a house. I have 2 little kids. And as soon as I got into my home, I realized, oh my gosh, every week there seems to be some new home issue that I need to take care of.
And you have a wife also.
I have a wife, I have little kids.
Yes.
I am incapable of helping in these situations. And it sort of dawned on me that there really has to be a better way. So I went on actually Nextdoor, the social media app for neighbors, and I wrote a post that I bought a house, little did I know what I was getting into. It seems like everything is breaking. I'm constantly on the phone with a vendor. I'm constantly waiting for someone to show up. And what I really need is a house manager. I need someone that I can trust, who will come over on a monthly basis, take care of the little things, help me in an emergency, and help strategize. And I wrote, does anyone else have this problem, or is it just me? Exclamation point, question mark. I got hundreds and hundreds of comments on this post. It's a very emotional topic. And I was really fascinated because about a dozen comments were the same thing. There's actually a local company in Montgomery County called Hassle-Free Home. They've been around for 20 years. I've been a customer for 15. I've been a customer for 10 years. I've been a customer for 5. And so I called the owner of Hassle-Free Home, Jim Vagonis, and Andrew Belfour, who are also, Jim's also the volunteer fire chief in Rockville. And I said, hey, I'd really like to sign up for your service. And they said, are you the guy that posted about us on Nextdoor? I said, yes. They said, well, we'd really like to meet you. We got more new business from your post than we've gotten in the past 12 months. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So I started to use the service. I was a very enthusiastic customer. I was getting the most important thing back, my time. Plus, my house is really well maintained now. My wife's super happy with that whole situation. And I decided to take a non-linear bet and acquire the company.
He bought the company. And why did you buy the company? Was it that you were not satisfied with the services? You thought the services could be improved, or they were just not monetizing it in the way that it should have been?
Oh, I think that I think the way the business had started and was run was just so special, right? You built a company, and there's no churn in this business. The customers that had used Hassle-Free Home, they'd been using it for decades. You don't see that, you know, when you look at the landscape of companies out there. And then as an entrepreneur, I felt that there was untapped market demand. And my thesis was that, you know, if we were able to explain to consumers that they, you know, really need this service, the demand would follow. And so far, you know, that's playing out pretty well.
Tell us some of the hassles that we deal with every day. Because listen, I don't know anybody watching the broadcast today. Plus, you're a local DMV guy, which is good. It brings it home. Talk about some of the hassles that you will let people just allow others to manage for them.
Oh, totally. We like to say we manage your home so that you don't have to, and we do 4 main things. The first is preventative maintenance. We'll come over on a monthly or a quarterly basis. We do all those little things to keep the house healthy. We empty the dryer vent. We recaulk around showers, vanities, and sinks. We change your water filters, air filters, smoke detector batteries. All these little things so that the most important expensive systems last long, break less. You know, then we also knock out your to-do list. Everyone has that honey-do handyman list. So during these same recurring visits, we also get all that little stuff done. Hanging that light, bringing in the outside furniture, doing some power washing, affixing hooks, hanging blinds. And then it's vendor management, right? When you have small maintenance projects, you need 1 gutter, you need 1 new window, you want to repoint your flagstone, time to repaint the exterior of your house. We have a small network of local companies that we've been working with for a really long time, and at the customer's sole discretion, on a case-by-case basis, we manage them for you. And then lastly, we're your house manager. So when inevitably you wake up and you see a drip coming from that faucet, or there was a major storm a couple nights ago and there might be some work to do on that, we're here to save the day.
I think the most important thing you said, and I've always said this, is that I buy time.
Yes.
You know, I'd rather just pay people to do things that I just don't want to be bothered with. And you know, why do you think that having a house manager is such a growing trend now?
I think there's a few things that are happening. I think that one, the DIY generation is getting a little bit older, and now they need to get a little bit of extra help to make sure that their asset, your home's one of your most important assets, is well taken care of. And then likewise, the millennial generation's the largest group buying new homes, and they lack the knowledge really to take care of their houses and are very prone to wanting to try convenience-based services. So you have these 2 market kind of tailwinds kind of going into this.
Why is proactive home maintenance key to long-term health, longevity of a home. It's just so true. I mean, you've got to take care of it, and sometimes you don't even know what's lurking.
Exactly.
And when you literally find out, it costs you an arm and a leg.
Yeah, and usually it's too late, right?
Yes.
So the most important and expensive systems in your home, they're really expensive. If an average HVAC system lasts 12 years and you get it to last 16 because you change the filters, you service the system every spring and winter, that's actually making you money. And when you think about an analogy maybe to a car, you know, a certified pre-owned car, it sells for more than just a used car. So we like to say that when you have your house professionally managed, at that moment that you do go to sell it, you're going to get a better price for your home, and that's going to be really good to your long-term planning.
So what are the most common mistakes, Erik, homeowners make when it comes to maintenance? And how does Hassle-Free Home Services leverage technology to streamline the home care?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that a couple things that homeowners tend to forget is really to do the proactive preventative maintenance. And when you do that, you're able to ensure that you run into fewer unexpected issues in your home. And our service is built on the fact that about half of every visit is for preventative maintenance. We're going to do proactively the little things that keep your house healthy without you even asking us to. A good example of that is once a year we drain the sediment from your water heater. That's not something the average homeowner is doing on a yearly basis, but we do that. And when you do that, you know, you're going to have hotter water for longer. You're going to avoid having that, you know, water heater burst, you know, all of a sudden after 10 years and have an issue not only in that room, but also likely your basement or that area. And then we have software that supports, it's a tech-enabled business. So every single interaction with a customer, every single home is put onto our proprietary platform, and we're able to proactively get ahead of signals that are happening in your home as a result of us managing homes in your neighborhood, all the data we have, and just provide, you know, a modern consumer experience.
You know, I will tell you this, Erik's my guy. I'm telling you, lots of integrity, a great guy. I've known him. I have much respect for what he does. And I just cannot thank you enough for finally agreeing to come on the show to talk about these things. I've been asking for such a long time. I want to thank all of our guests today for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. And again, we cannot wish you a happy Thanksgiving celebration, which is one of the most celebrated holidays throughout the year in the United States. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey, listen, get that Hassle-Free Home Services. Get it now. Absolutely. We're out of here.
Thank you.